Shadows tell stories. Paranormal M listens. Hauntings, curses, and unexplained events fill our path. Subscribe now. The darkness is waiting. The ghost beyond the walls. My fascination with the paranormal began more than 2 decades ago now. Back then, I was just a teenager. My stepfather recently passed away from a sudden illness. I lived about maybe several hours away, and I never got the chance to see him one last time. A few weeks later, I went to my sister's house to help watch over my baby niece. It was her nap time, so I tucked her into her crib and walked down the hallway to the living room. From the old couch, I could still see her room through the doorway, and I was exhausted. So I decided to rest while she slept. Drifting into that strange in-between place between sleep and wakefulness, I began to hear soft thumps like tiny feet bouncing on the mattress, light giggles, and half asleep I mumbled, "Please sleep for Auntie." Let my head sink back into the cushion. But just as I was about to nod off, a sharp, cheerful whistle rang through the house. It was clear and deliberate, like a tune somebody would whistle on a sunny day. My niece suddenly stopped moving, her eyes fixed on something near the closet, and then she laughed again. My heart froze. I was sure somebody had broken in. Bursting down the hall, I flung the door open. No one was there, and the window was shut, and the room was silent. Terrified, I scooped her up and waited outside until a friend could come over. When we returned, and after checking every corner of the house, I tried to make sense of what happened. As I changed her diaper and suddenly pointed toward the closet door, I whispered, "Pops." That was what she used to call my stepdad. The fear slowly gave way to a warm, unexpected calm. I knew then that maybe he had come to say goodbye. In the years that followed, I found myself seeking more, and I wanted more proof, more signs that the world wasn't as simple as it seemed. In my early 20s, my husband and I became close to one another couple who shared that same curiosity about the paranormal. In our town, the local cemetery was notorious for ghost stories. It stood beside an old psychiatric hospital, surrounded by government buildings with bright buzzing lights that contrasted with the darkness of the graves. One chilly night after work, they picked me up for our very first ghost hunt. The moment we stepped onto the path between the gravestones, the air felt different and heavy and electric. I brushed my face and I thought I was walking through spider webs, though there actually was nothing there. We wandered for a while until we reached the back of a cemetery near a small ivy-covered hill. Chain-link fence separated us from one of the lit-up state buildings beyond. And that's when we saw him. A figure in what looked like a bulky uniform was walking slowly along the fence. The parking lot lights cast him in a sharp outline, but I couldn't see his face. He held a flashlight pointed to the ground, moving it in a steady rhythmic arc. I stood at the top of the hill, and sure, we were about to be caught trespassing, but then without warning he stopped, turned with uncanny precision, and raised the flashlight toward us in one swift mechanical motion. Even then, I saw no features. No face, no breath, just a shape. Move told me everything. It was not a guard, and yet he was as solid and real as anyone I'd ever seen. It was unsettling, yes, but also thrilling. It was exactly what I'd been looking for. That night only deepened my belief that the world is layered with mysteries that we can't always explain. My passion for the paranormal has never left me, because I truly felt there's more out there than what meets the eye. The night the locks listened. Okay, so for context, as far back as I can remember, I've always ended up living in places that had, well, let's just say uninvited guests. When I was younger, I'd tell kids at school about lights turning on by themselves or random knocks at night. Everyone just thought I was trying to be creepy for attention. Anyway, when I was around 13, I moved with my grandma to this old house near the pier in downtown Huntington Beach, California. And right from the start, weird things happened. Like objects sliding across counters when no one was near, or bathroom mirrors fogged up with handprints after showers. Lights that flickered in perfectly timed rhythms, unlike my voice. And I swear I'm not making this up. I've had way too many of these moments not to believe something's there. Halloween night 2015. Back then I had a small but tight-knit group of friends as we were just starting high school. Most of them thought my ghost stories were just for laughs. Except for my best friend at the time. She believed me, though she'd get spooked every single time I shared something. So on Halloween night 2015, I invited them over. We weren't exactly trick-or-treating, at least seriously. Just roaming around, collecting a little candy for nostalgia. Then heading back to hang out on my rooftop deck. My grandma and mom had come to a costume party in LA, and I had the house all to myself. While we're sitting outside, somebody brought up the ghost in my house. It became this mini horror storytelling session. And for some context, a man had passed away in the upstairs bedroom years ago, apparently from a sudden heart attack. My friends started joking around, making fun of him, calling him Casper with bad manners. I told them to chill because in my house, we were going to pick a moment to react. It'd be on Halloween night. The house had these old school sort of intercom speakers. It was built into every hallway, including the deck. And sometimes late at night, one of them would just turn on. I always joked that the ghost liked listening to people's conversations. And that night, I swear, it felt like somebody was paying attention. The first lock. Eventually, I got up to grab more soda from the kitchen on the first floor. And of course, nobody wanted to stay alone on the deck, so they all followed me. To get downstairs, we had to go through a spiral staircase that ended in the laundry room. The outer door was mostly glass, and beyond it, total darkness. I reached for the knob, and it didn't budge. It was locked. My friends froze and said, "Wait, did your grandma lock us out?" One of them said. But she'd been gone for hours. I FaceTimed her just to prove it, and she confirmed no one locked anything. Their faces drained of color, and I reminded them of what I'd said earlier. I told you not to mess with him. Half joking, half dead serious. I told them to apologize to the spirit, and they muttered a shaky sorry. And click, the knob turned, but the deadbolt was still stuck. I told them, say it like you mean it. And the second their apology sounded real, the deadbolt unlocked itself. Round 2. We stepped into the laundry room, nervous laughter filling the space. And of course, they started making jokes again. Before I could even finish rolling my eyes, click, the lock behind us clicked shut. This time no one laughed. They apologized faster than I'd ever seen anyone apologize. And a few seconds later, the door unlocked smoothly, like nothing had ever happened. My friends bolted straight out of the house, swearing they'd never come back, and, well, guess what? They didn't, and, well, the rest of the night, I wasn't scared. I'd grown used to weird things. I said out loud, "Thanks for backing me up, buddy." Laughed a little bit, grabbed my soda, and threw on some horror movies. The rest of the night was weirdly calm, almost like he was satisfied with the lesson that he just taught them, and, well, I don't know if my friends remember the night clearly or if they just shoved it deep down and never spoke of it again. But to me, that night was a perfect 10 out of 10 Halloween. Happy, probably at this point, way late Halloween, guys. when the ordinary turned unsettling. I've had a handful of odd experiences in my life, the kind that make you question your own skepticism. One of them in particular still sits heavily in my mind. I've always prided myself on being rational, the kind of person who looks for explanations instead of ghosts. But lately, that confidence is starting to crack. It all started about 3 weeks ago. I'm sitting in the living room after midnight, half dozing on our worn-out couch. TV was off, but it reflected the dim light from the kitchen. And that's when I saw something. A shape faint but distinct. Something dark gliding slowly behind the counter, and I froze. It was almost graceful, like somebody moving without trying to make a sound. I must have stared for a good 10 seconds before jerking my head around. Nothing. When I looked back, the reflection was empty again. Just my kitchen, just the silence. About 10 days later, something else happened. I was taking a hoodie to the bedroom and the lights were off. My wife was already asleep. The room was pitch black. As I walked in, the sleeve hanging near my leg suddenly jerked backwards. Not just brushed, but tugged, hard enough for me to stop mid-step. I thought it had caught on the door frame or maybe the corner of the dresser, but when I flicked on the light, nothing was there. Nothing for it to even catch on. Stood there for a moment feeling ridiculous, but my heart was pounding anyway. But tonight was different. I'd just gotten home late after dinner with my cousins. The underground parking garage is usually bright and calm, and I packed our silver car and I locked it with the key fob. Across the lot was our second car, the black one where I'd left my laptop bag earlier. Walked over, grabbed the bag, and turned toward the exit gate. And that's when I heard it. Bang! The trunk of the silver car slammed shut behind me, loud and sharp in the quiet garage. My chest went tight. I turned slowly, scanning every shadow. No footsteps, no movement, just the silver car sitting exactly where I'd left it. I waited 20 seconds, maybe more, and then I forced myself to walk back. I looked underneath, around, and even checked the back seat through the window. Nobody. There's no button on the fob that closes the trunk. It was already closed when I parked it. There's no way to shut it from the inside either. I'm not that type to panic easily, but I won't lie. I gripped the flashlight like a weapon, made sure nothing was lurking. These things don't happen to me often, or at least they didn't. Never thought of myself as somebody who experiences paranormal stuff, but now I'm not sure what to think anymore. Whispers in the quiet hour. Last night, between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m., I walked softly through the hallway and took pictures of my daughter's office and bedroom. She was 34 when she passed away suddenly in her sleep because of a heart condition. Happened last March. She lived with autism, anxiety, and bouts of depression. When she became an adult, we decided that living together would make life a little gentler for both of us. And ever since she's been gone, I often feel, not just think, but know that she still lingers here sometimes. I thought maybe if I took some pictures, I might catch a sign or a soft glow, a spark or something. Apparently, I had the live setting turned on my iPhone. When I replayed the photos, there was movement in places where nothing should have moved. In the office, a faint static sound whispered through the speaker, and the lamp's light seemed to dim. Then it flared softly, like it was breathing. And then, in her bedroom where she passed, the tiny ceramic nightlight on her dresser pulsed as if it were plugged in. It was not plugged in. For a moment, I was wondering if exhaustion was playing tricks on me. Later that evening, my friend came over. Asked him to look at the pictures, and without telling him what I had seen. So he's a skeptic, so he started listing logical reasons. He said maybe the static came from the vent system, but that was off, and the lamp, he thought, might have caught some kind of camera glitch. The nightlight, he said, might have been reflecting something. We decided to walk through the rooms together before overthinking. As soon as we stepped into that bedroom, something strange happened. The veins on her hands seemed to rise, like they do when your blood pressure spikes. And it wasn't cold, it felt more like pressure. We tried to take another picture, but my iPhone suddenly locked and wouldn't recognize my code, and when we walked back out into the hallway, everything relaxed. The veins settled, and my phone worked again like nothing had happened. Then came the part that shook me the most. My friend suggested we record an EVP, something I'd never done before. He opens the voice recorder as we stood just outside the bedroom door. "Ask her if she's here," he said. So I did, and I waited, and when we played the audio back, there was a soft, low voice saying, "Turn it off." I froze, and my friend leaned closer, listening again carefully. I asked him if he thought the voice sounded like her, and he didn't answer right away. And then he said firmly that we should delete both recordings, or at least not listen to them alone. I haven't touched them yet. Tonight, I don't want to sleep upstairs. Cleo, my border collie, hasn't gone up there since she passed. He used to think dogs sense more than we do. So has anybody else experienced something like this? The flickering lights, the recordings, I don't know what to make of it. I just know it felt real, and it shook me in a way I didn't expect. I keep wishing she were still here a little longer. I might sleep on the couch tonight. My kindest regards to her and you. Whispers along the hallway. Before I get into everything that's happened, I should mention I've dealt with sleep paralysis for about 4 years now. It's never been fun. But up until moving into this flat, it was always something visual, never anything that felt real. My boyfriend, on the other hand, has never had any paranormal experiences at all, but what's been going on lately has left both of us uneasy. From the very first week, there were small oddities, we can call them. We'd hear soft thuds like something light dropping onto the floor and rolling into the corner of a room. Yet every time we checked, nothing was out of place. In the few nights, there was a low dragging sound. It was along the hallway wall, like a heavy cloth being pulled. But when we opened the door, nothing was there, and the sensor light outside remained dark, as though nothing had passed. One thing that still unsettles me is this string of tiny bells. They're hanging from our living room window. And every so often, even when the air is completely still, we hear them. They're rattling sharply, almost violently. It's never a soft tinkle. The bells swing side to side, not back and forth, making a harsh tapping sound against the glass. And we tested everything. Windows closed, heating off, vents blocked. Still, it happens. And always when we least expect it. Not long after moving in, my sleep became a disaster. Working part-time night shifts meant I'd be used to sleeping during the day, but here, even night sleep was fragmented. When I did manage to drift off, the nightmares were brutal and vivid enough to make me cry the moment I woke up. And then came the night that changed everything. Across from our bed is a tall bookcase with glass panels, and beside it a mirror above the dresser. I was in sleep paralysis, frozen but fully aware, and in the reflection of the mirror I saw my boyfriend, who wasn't even home. They walked behind me. I didn't see him in the room itself, only in the mirror. The figure stopped behind the dresser and then disappeared out of the mirror's edge. Seconds later, something tugged sharply at the bottom of the blanket, like a hand snapping it downward. That had never happened to me before, and it jolted me awake with my heart pounding. Another night he was stuck in traffic after a long shift. I went to bed early. And at some point, I remember him walking into the room, dropping his bag, and we talked sleepily for a few moments. I even remember the warmth of him lying beside me. Hours later, he woke me up as he entered the bedroom for real, still wearing his work clothes, carrying dinner. I just stared at him, my mind spinning. He swore he had just arrived home, and I had no idea who or what I spoke to earlier. The worst moment came unexpectedly. I was tidying up while chatting with him. When I turned toward the hallway, I saw a shape, not a blur, not a shadowed trick of light. It was a clear, solid outline of a child crouched directly behind him. It wasn't moving, it was just there. I bolted into the bedroom and locked the door, shaking so hard I couldn't even breathe properly. The following weekend, my stepmom, who's deeply spiritual, by the way, they run a small Reiki and tarot practice. They came to cleanse the flat, and she brought sage, black tourmaline, and murmured something under her breath as she moved through the rooms. I noticed she passed to my boyfriend's side of the bed, asking quietly which side he slept on. She didn't explain why, and at that moment I really didn't want to know. Since then, the activities died down a little, but the occasional odd sound or swinging bells, but can't ignore the thread that seems to lead back to him. The mirrored figure, the strange doubling of his arrival home, the silhouette behind him, and even my stepmom's reaction. I did some digging online. I found a mention of an old underground water channel supposedly runs beneath this area. Some local folklore connects them to thin places, as they call them, spaces where the barrier between worlds is weaker. Whether that's true or not, I still have no solid answers. All I know is this flat feels different, and not in a way I can just shrug off. The night the house breathed. I feel like I've said that title several times. I, a 21-year-old female, started this job as an in-home health aide back in September. And at first, it was the most ordinary thing ever. My client, an older woman, just needed somebody to help with her meals and meds and keep her company. Everything was routine, until I began picking up more night shifts. I'm also a college student, so my nights kind of fit my schedule the best. One chilly morning, sorting through her medical for the day when her grandson, who also lives there, was heading out for work. He kept bumping into this little air freshener bottle on the counter. After the third time it toppled, he got annoyed and tucked it tightly between the couch cushions so it wouldn't roll away again. Not even 10 minutes after he drove off, the bottle shot out of the couch like it had been launched by a spring. It spun once in the air and landed upright, perfectly still. I froze, my brain scrambled to explain it. Maybe the cushion shifted or air pressure or something logical. It had to be. But then it didn't stop. Picture frames would slowly unhook themselves and crash into the floor. I'd hear footsteps padding down the hallway when no one was home except me and my client. Cabinet doors creaked open and slammed shut. And once a spoon flew across the kitchen and clattered against the wall. And another night, I swear I saw a blurred handprint smear across the kitchen window from the outside. But last night was different. I came in early because of a delivery of groceries sitting on the porch. My client greeted me like always, warm smile and all. I put everything away and I made her some warm soup because she gets cold easily. While I was rinsing a spoon that she had dropped, something fell behind me, a tin can. When I bent down to pick it up, the dish sponge from the sink shot past my ear like somebody had thrown it. I tried to brush it off, and this wasn't the first weird thing. After all, we ate, we chatted, and things settled a bit. Then as I walked back into the kitchen, I heard something, a faint rattling like a drawer being opened slowly. Thinking maybe a stray cat had gotten in again, I flicked the light switch. The bulb popped with a loud crack. The entire kitchen sank into darkness. And in that exact second, the temperature dropped. It wasn't a slow cool down. It was like the air itself was pulled out of the room, and I checked the thermostat. 59 degrees Fahrenheit. Panicked, I ran back to the client. The living room was warm and untouched, like nothing had happened. She looked at me confused until something, a shape, had moved at the edge of the kitchen doorway, and her face went pale. She clutched my arm so tight I could feel her nails. Thankfully, her grandson came home right then. When I told him what happened, even he wouldn't step into the kitchen. Maybe it's a spirit, maybe somebody's been creeping around without us knowing. All I know is my next shift is tomorrow night, and I do not want to go back there. You gotta protect the old lady, come on, go back there. The Quiet Woods. I recently moved into an old stone cottage at the end of a vast forest reserve. My mother passed away when I was 20, and since my parents were separated, I was pretty much the only one to inherit her estate. And after she was gone, I struggled to keep up with college. I was supposed to graduate at 22, I ended up finishing at 25. When I finally got my degree, I decided to buy a small, secluded place not far from where I grew up, hoping to restore it and eventually turn it into a cozy guest house. The house itself was charming, but it was in desperate need of repairs. Since I couldn't afford another place, I'd been living here while working on the renovation. Out back, there's a couple of old lantern poles, rusty but surprisingly still functional. At night, they cast a soft glow on the tree line, which makes for a strangely calming view. Whenever I can't sleep, which is pretty often, I end up staring through my bedroom window at those trees and the sky behind them. The first odd thing started happening a few weeks after moving in. Between 2 and 5 in the morning, I'd occasionally spot faint bluish lights flickering deep in the woods. They weren't like flashlights or headlights, more like dozens of tiny reflections swirling around in the dark. And they moved. I told myself they were just fireflies or some trick of the eyes. But the flickering, it didn't stop. One night I was jolted awake by a sound I can only describe as somebody dragging their nails across the back door. It was slow and rhythmic. I didn't go downstairs. I froze there, and I've always been paranoid, even at 25. Still checked behind the curtains before going to bed. The next evening, I set up an old security camera on a wooden stool by the kitchen door. I left some leftover bread and chicken bones out as bait, something my uncle taught me to do years ago when we used to track foxes. For a few nights, nothing changed, except the camera. Every morning, I'd find it lying face down or pointing toward the opposite direction, and every single night, the food disappeared. No paw prints, no shoe prints. Even after it rained, there wasn't a single mark on the ground. So it wasn't just the missing food. I started noticing something in the recordings. Moments before the camera would shift, the forest would go dead silent. No owls, no insects, no nothing. Like the world had paused. Then, about an hour later, the sound would return as if nothing had happened. It happened on every video, every single one. Months passed like this. I eventually saved enough to have a tall iron fence built around the backyard. It gave me a sense of relief, like maybe I'd finally cut off whatever had been getting close. And that feeling didn't last. 2 nights after the fence was installed, I woke up, looked out the kitchen window, and my stomach dropped. There was a gaping hole in the middle of the new fence, nearly a meter wide. And I know what you're thinking, but there's no bears here, none of them. Authorities came and checked, no animal tracks, no human footprints. Just broken iron scattered toward the spot where I used to leave the food. And this happened just last Sunday. Haven't slept in that house since. I've been staying at my aunt's place for the week, waiting for daylight every time I need to stop by and grab something. still don't know what came through that fence. But I know one thing for sure. It's not something I've ever seen before. The night he knocked. For context, my father's health had declined so much that he was practically fading away at my half-sister's place, where the rest of the family stayed with the grandkids. He could barely speak or comprehend what was happening anymore. Yesterday, while I was home alone, he passed. The funeral team came to take him away. We planned on cremation, and that night I did manage to sleep until around 4 a.m. When I finally did, I experienced one of the worst night terrors I've had in years. It wasn't just one nightmare. I kept falling into what felt like endless loops of waking up inside the dream. False awakenings, maybe 20 of them. And in every single one, my father's spirit was there and talking and watching, reaching out. I woke up shaking with barely an hour of sleep. And right before I actually woke up, my phone buzzed twice. One text from my brother and one from my mom, and both just said, yes. I always keep my phone on silent, so this wasn't about sound waking me up. I knew it wasn't a delay either, because I'd been on calls and texting a friend almost all night. Felt like something had pushed through at that exact moment. When I stepped out of my bedroom, I whispered, "Dad, if that's you, give me a sign." Almost immediately, I heard a soft creak from the hallway. The air felt colder than it should have, and in his old room, the small lamp I'd left on was suddenly off. I switched it on again and asked once more. A couple of knocks answered me, and my chest tightened. Walked into the bathroom, still asking for another sign. The light above the mirror flicked on and started flickering like crazy. I backed away trembling. I lit a cigarette and called my brother, but he just sighed and said I was overreacting. Hung up to go back to sleep. Then I called an old friend, someone who's always been the ghost expert of our group. Got out of bed without hesitation and joined me on Discord. We turned on webcams just in case. He suggested we start with a basic banishment ritual. Some old Latin prayers, too. And when we began in Dad's room, the already icy air turned even sharper. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the candle. As we chanted, things started moving. Not dramatically, but enough to make it clear something was there. A drawer slid shut by itself. Yes, Gecko. A stray cable was pulled from under the door, and my friend saw it too. It wasn't just me. And the spirit, or whatever part of him was left, it seemed restless. It slammed the pantry door it opened and snuffed out the incense halfway through burning. Something I'd never even seen happen before. It made faint tapping noises around the house. My friend told me that we might need something stronger. And we didn't have a Bible, no proper cross either, so I made one from 2 paintbrushes taped together. Rinsed out a plastic bottle, filled it with water and some sea salt found in the kitchen. Figured it might work better than table salt. I prayed over it the way he instructed, and then room by room I sprinkled the water and whispered blessings. Not because I was trying to fight him, but because I wanted him to rest. I told him out loud I forgive him for everything, for the silence, for the distance, for the things he could never fix when he was alive. Slowly the house changed. The heaviness in the air lifted, and dawn began to stretch through the windows, warm and golden. Felt like he was still there watching, but not angry anymore. I promised him I'd take care of his grandkids, and Ginger, his little terrier who'd spent the night pacing the floor. I don't think I'll ever forget that night. The way light switches were flipping without a touch, the way cold wrapped around me like water. Maybe it was grief taking form, or maybe the spirit needed to say something before leaving. Either way, the house is quiet now, and that's enough for me. When the night whispers. So I've been dealing with sleep paralysis for quite some time now. Ever since my senior year of high school. At first, it absolutely terrified me. Even though I didn't see or hear anything strange back then. Just the feeling of being frozen in place was enough to make my heart race. Eventually, I got used to it, and it mostly happened whenever I slept on my back, so I'd just wait until I could wiggle a finger or move my shoulder, then turn to my side and fall back asleep. It was uncomfortable, but manageable. But a couple of years later, things started to get odd. I began hearing things and feeling things. And the more it happened, the harder it became to just brush it off. One of the worst episodes was during a family trip in 2022. My mom, my cousin, and I rented this little wooden cabin near a lake. It was supposed to be quiet and peaceful. I don't think I've ever had so many episodes in such a short time. Almost every night I'd either jolt awake from a nightmare or suddenly be paralyzed. I'd be wide awake hearing whispers around my ears like somebody was talking behind the walls. And the first night I heard the sound of a woman humming a tune, soft at first, then louder, almost like it was right next to me. I opened my eyes, but I couldn't move. When I finally sat up, I checked the other room. Everyone was asleep. A few nights later, there was a sharp thud, like someone dropping a tray of glasses. It echoed through the kitchen. I jumped up, ran to check. Everything was exactly how he left it. Nothing was broken even. Then came the night when I felt somebody slowly touching my shoulder while I was half conscious. I tried to turn around, but my body wouldn't respond. The air felt thick, like the room itself was holding its breath. But the last night was the worst one. I was sound asleep when a series of soft knocks tapped against the window behind me. I opened my eyes, completely frozen. Then came a low, unfamiliar voice whispering, "Hello." I wanted to scream for my mom, but only a weak sound came out of my throat. And when I finally broke free, I was shaking so hard I ended up sleeping on the floor next to her bed. And I was 21, but that night I felt like a scared child again. Another time, back home, I opened my eyes and I saw what I thought was my cousin sitting at the foot of my bed. I tried to call her name, no sound was coming out. And as I stared, her figure slowly dissolved into a dark silhouette, like spreading across the wall. I tried to move to push it away, but I couldn't even breathe properly. When I finally woke up for real, I was alone. No cousin, no shadow, just scratch marks on my thighs and ankles. I must have done it to myself in a panic. The most recent one was quieter, but maybe scarier because of how real it felt. I was half asleep, facing the wall. That's when I heard someone whisper, "Good night," right behind me. Thought it was my mom like always, but when I turned around, the room was empty. And later that same night, I heard the window creak open. I never leave it unlocked, and I switched on the lamp and I saw it was slightly ajar. Tried to convince myself I just forgot to close it. But as I lay back down, I felt the mattress dip beside me, like somebody just sat down. I could feel warm breath near my face and my whole body locked up again. And that night I didn't sleep again until the sun came up. Hey, the sun's coming up outside for me right now. Fancy that. Whispers beyond the clearing. A little bit of background first. Before my great-grandpa bought the land, I think it was used as like an old scrapyard. And even now, we still stumble across shards of glass and rusty tire rims or random pieces of metal here and there. That's not really the part that unsettles us the most. What came before the scrapyard is a bit of a mystery. We've also dug up arrowheads and fragments of pottery and what looked like an old wagon axle buried deep in the dirt. Most of the arrowheads were found near the creek that runs alongside the field behind her house, or further in the thicket beyond. That's why it always felt strange to us. There's no record of anything ever being here, and the old wagon axle was found much deeper in the woods by my uncle. He dragged it out to the edge of the clearing, still propped up against a tree like some forgotten relic. Everything on the property seemed to lead back to that clearing. When I was younger, I used to see figures, just shadows really. They'd be drifting toward the trees or standing perfectly still facing the house. My mom told me I used to scare her half to death when I whispered, "The people in the clearing are watching us." And even now, on quiet nights, you can hear somebody softly calling your name from that direction. And if you glance out of the corner of your eye, you might catch a glimpse of those small... Oh no, I'm in a loop. You might catch a glimpse of those same silhouettes. No one in my family goes near the clearing after dark anymore. It doesn't just feel eerie, it feels wrong. And as for our house, we built it ourselves, fairly new. You'd think nothing would be lingering here, but things happen. Once every single cabinet door in the kitchen slammed open at the same time, and another night, like a cast iron mug fell from a high shelf. But when we rushed in, it was standing perfectly upright in the center of the floor. A family friend who's sensitive to these kinds of things, you could say, tried to talk to whatever might have caused it. We didn't get answers, but the air felt heavy, and sometimes somebody will grab your shoulder or brush past you. And when you turn, no one will be there, and there's the occasional knock on a wall or door, though it's rare. What's not rare is the feeling of being watched. It clings to the house like damp air. Up in my loft at night, I hear footsteps inching closer to my bed, even though the ceiling isn't tall enough for anyone to stand. And sometimes my family leaves lights on or refuses to open a door because it feels like something or someone's waiting right behind it. Whispers between the mirrors. I just started my first year at college, moved into one of the older dorm buildings on campus. My room's layout is a little strange. It's meant for 2 people. The beds are separated by a narrow partition wall. What unsettles me most, though, are the 2 massive sliding closet mirrors that face each other directly by the door. When I walk in, it feels like I'm stepping into some kind of endless reflection. Even in the daytime, it's unnerving. The first term went by fine, more or less. Classes and friends and late-night study sessions. But every so often, I'd get this sharp, cold sensation on the back of my neck, like somebody's standing right behind me. And my desk is positioned facing the wall across from the entrance. My back's always to the door. At night, I can't stand having the entryway in darkness. Between those mirrors, it feels like something might just step out if I look away too long. Sometimes I'd catch faint movement in the corner of my eye. I always told myself it was nothing. Winter break came, and I went home for a couple of weeks. When I returned for winter term, I went to dinner with a group of friends for the first night back. My roommate had left earlier that evening to meet her sister. The room was empty. When I came back, though, everything on my desk was completely rearranged. Books stacked backwards, water bottles upside down. My medication scattered and perfume bottles laid on their sides. Even the little wooden lighthouse I painted myself had been taken off the wall and hung upside down. I can't explain how violated I felt. It wasn't just the mess, it was the fact that someone had touched my things when I wasn't there. And given what's happened to me in the past, that kind of invasion hits harder than I'd like to admit. My roommate looked as confused as I felt when I asked her, and to this day I really don't know who did it. Could have been her friends or someone else entirely. She eventually moved out. Not because of that, but because we just didn't get along well. Since she's been gone, the strange things haven't stopped, though. If anything, they've changed and maybe quieter now, but closer, it seems. Sometimes I can feel it standing in a particular corner of the room near the mirrored closets. The feeling shifts, sometimes like a curious child staring, and other times like something heavier and older and patient. A few nights ago, while lying in bed, I heard the creak of the other mattress as if somebody was slowly sliding off of it. I checked. Of course no one was there. Typical. Other nights I hear the sound of slow breathing, just at the edge of the room. My lamp's turned on by itself 3 times, all at around the same hour, and shadows flicker at the edge of my vision. My skin prickles before I even turn my head. The moment that truly got underneath my skin, it happened last week. I was folding laundry on my bed, making neat piles, and out of nowhere, a single clear thought slammed into my head like a voice I didn't own. Behind you. I froze, like for a full minute I couldn't move. My heart felt like it was trying to climb out of my chest. And now I have my own night routine. Not really because I want to, but because I need it. The mirrored closet doors must be shut completely. I leave the hallway light angled toward the entrance, and I check the bathroom with a flashlight before switching on the overhead light. I've never been afraid of the dark before living here, but something about this room feels wrong when the lights are off. I feel ridiculous talking about it. It's just like some overactive imagination stuff. But I've never been this unsettled by anything in my life. And that's everything so far. So far, so good. The Night Visitor. In early December last year, on the 5th night after our wedding, I learned what it truly means to feel terror in your bones. It's not just fear in the mind, it's a crushing, icy weight pressing against your chest and cold, invisible fingertips sliding slowly down your spine. A few months earlier, my wife-to-be had started having strange dreams. She described a small, hunched creature covered in coarse, reddish fur with a child's body and an old woman's face. It spoke to her in a language that she didn't yet really know, but somehow understood. She was certain the creature came from beneath the ground, and strangely enough, within the same week, her younger brother began seeing the same figure in his dreams. It whispered foul, wicked things. When they moved to a new apartment, the dreams vanished. But on the 5th night of our marriage, I woke up abruptly to find my wife sitting sort of upright in bed and half laying down. They were staring past me with wide, terrified eyes. "There's someone behind you," she whispered. The door was locked from inside. At first I thought she was still dreaming, but when I turned, the air in the room felt heavy. I checked under the bed and inside the wardrobe and behind the curtains, and nothing. She described what she saw. A figure around 4 feet tall, wrapped in something like a black cloak, its shoulders sharp and narrow, its hair long and gleaming like polished coal. But the face she said was unmistakably human. When it noticed her gaze, its expression changed, almost startled, as if it hadn't expected to be seen. I held her close, convincing myself it was a lingering nightmare. We eventually fell back asleep. The next night, something happened to me. As I slept, a sound began, not from the room, but from inside me. It started soft like a murmur, then grew into a deep, thunderous chant. It wasn't my voice, it was too deep and too old, and vibrated through my chest as if the walls were trembling with it. I woke up sitting bolt upright, my face buried in the blanket. And that's when the cold hit me, like something invisible pressing down on me, freezing my chest and spine. I couldn't move, and all I could do was force my mouth into kind of recite the Tasbih in my own voice, louder and louder. Recite the Tasbih. Until finally, with trembling hands, I pulled the blanket from my face, and my eyes went to the left toward the dresser, and every part of me knew that that's where it had been standing. I grabbed my wife's hand, and we fled the room, refusing to return until sunlight bled through the curtains. Why is sunlight always bleeding? Later, she told me I'd been kind of whimpering before I began to recite. She said it sounded like I was seeing something that wasn't there, and she herself had stayed hidden under the blanket, frozen until I urged her to join me in the prayer. And from that night on, something, whatever it was, began kind of waking us up almost at exactly 3 a.m. each night. And the fear has lessened over time, but the presence remains. We both wake at the same moment, as if nudged by unseen hands. We lie still, faces buried under the covers, hearts hammering. And on some nights when the feeling isn't as strong, I dare to lift the blanket and look. Never anything there. But other nights it's unbearable. We curl up, we're turning our backs on the edges of the bed and wrapping ourselves tight. And in those moments, I swear I feel someone standing right beside us at the edge. Sometimes the corners of the blanket twitch, as if tugged gently, and that soft, almost deliberate tugging more than anything else nearly unravels my mind. I still know it haunts us, because in daylight I promise myself I'll face it and fight it and banish it. But every night when the hour returns and the air grows cold, all courage leaves me. All I want then is for the night to end. Whispers in the Magnolia House. I was forced to leave my mother's house just a few weeks after my 18th birthday. With nowhere else to go, I ended up living with my uncle and father in a quiet old house on the outskirts of Selma, Alabama. Shout out to you-know-who. It used to belong to my great-grandmother before she passed. It carried a reputation that everybody in town seemed to know. People said the house had a past soaked in shadows and it once stood as a slave house. And later, according to rumor, a woman who practiced witchcraft living there alone for years. My father once told me that her rituals were so strange that even the trees around the house grew twisted. Growing up, my family shared eerie stories about the house. They swore they'd heard footsteps in the hallway and doors creaking in the dead of the night. I didn't believe any of it. Thought they were just being superstitious and moved into my dad's old room, the one with the view of the front yard. And the first night, my father gave me a strange warning. He said, "Don't ever answer if somebody calls your name after midnight. It's not me. It's not anyone." Then, almost casually, he added, "And if they don't get you, they'll get the dog." Bastards. I laughed at him because everybody said he'd gone a little bit mad years ago, but something in the way he looked at me made my stomach turn cold. For the first few weeks, nothing happened. I got kind of used to the creaky floors and the humid air and the way the house seemed to groan at night. But then one Friday afternoon, I just told my aunt I was heading to the Montgomery for a job interview. She didn't say much, just watched me with an expression I couldn't quite read. When I stepped outside a few hours later, my front tire was slashed clean through. My aunt appeared behind me as if she'd been waiting. "What happened?" she asked, though she didn't sound surprised. I brushed it off, replaced the tire, and fed my dog and drove away. When I came back after dark, my uncle met me at the door with a blank expression. "The dog's dead," he said. "Buried already." Something inside me cracked a little. My cousin, a quiet boy who usually never said much, he told me what really happened. Oh boy. In a chilling monotone, he said that they'd played with the dog until it stopped moving. There's no smile, no hesitation, just a cold truth that didn't feel human. Suspicious. The next morning, my father showed up, and as if he'd already knew this, and "I told you they'd take him. I saw your uncle talking to some folks who mess with bad spirits. You need to get out before they turn on you." That night, I was half asleep when I heard somebody call my childhood nickname from outside the door. It was my father's voice, warm and familiar, and my hand on the doorknob when I remembered his warning. I froze, but I opened the door anyway. Nothing, just the soft rustle of the trees in a dark yard that felt wrong. 2 nights later, something woke me at exactly 3 a.m. A low hum was filling the room, followed by the sound of wings beating above the roof. And when I stepped outside, shadows darted across the moonlight. The moon itself looked swollen and too close, like it was watching me. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When the job offer finally came through, I was ready to leave for good. I packed my things, sat on the bed for a last deep breath. And that's when it happened. A hand, cold and invisible, yanked my hair so hard I almost fell off the mattress. I didn't stop to look. I left the house in the middle of the night, headlights cutting through the fog, never looking back at the porch where shadows seemed to move. The Whispering Locks. When I first moved into this place, I felt like I'd finally found somewhere I belonged. I lived in this mid-sized apartment complex. And even though there are people around, I've barely exchanged a single word with any of them. It felt quiet and felt safe. At least it did at first. The odd things began subtly. A creak in the hallway, a faint scratching near the door, and at first I brushed it off as my 3 cats playing around. But lately, that explanation isn't enough anymore. For the past 2 weeks, every night at around 2:30, I hear the locks on my front door shifting. And I have 2 deadbolts and 1 latch lock. It's the sound of metal turning, like somebody testing the locks with a pick. And every single time I creep out to check and everything looks fine, except the top lock is slightly tilted like it's been touched. When I kneel to peek under the door, there's nothing but silence. The fear has gotten bad enough that I once stood in the hallway clutching a kitchen knife, waiting for something or someone to move. I tried to convince myself it's nothing. Sure, maybe the wind, maybe the pipes, maybe the neighbor downstairs, the one who once complained to the landlord about me, quote-unquote, making noise. But even that doesn't quite make sense. I started sleeping on the couch in my brother's room. Can't stand being alone in mine. Doesn't help much. He sleeps like a rock and hears nothing, and the more I think about it, the more I remember other strange moments. So one moment, we're going to call the hallway shadow. My kitchen's set up like a narrow passage, one entrance facing the living room, the other toward the bathroom. And right across from the kitchen is a small linen closet. It lines up perfectly with the bathroom door. One evening, while heating up dinner, I heard a faint shuffle. I leaned toward the opening facing the living room, and in the dim light I caught sight of something, a short, solid shadow in front of the closet. Bathroom light was on, its door wide open. I froze, and I was alone at home. My brother and mom were out, and the shadow didn't move, didn't waver. I blinked once, and it was gone. When they came home, I told my brother, and he laughed it off. The doorway figure. Another night again in the kitchen, scrolling on my phone, doing something silly, and there's a thing in my peripheral vision catching my attention. I looked up and toward the entrance. For the briefest second, I saw a dark, smudged figure leaning its head past that door frame as if watching me, and then it slipped away. I wondered if it was judging me about my questionable taste. I rushed out of the hallway, though, and there's nothing, just the quiet hum of the old elevator down the hall, and that weird little bloom sound that happens when you're watching TikTok too much. Those are the clearest moments I can remember, and there have been other things like soft footsteps when no one's there and something falling without explanation, the latch trembling as if brushed by a hand. My brother isn't bothered, my mom doesn't believe me, and I used to love the weekends. Now I seem to dread them. Weekends mean I'm home more, and that's when the locks start whispering again. More like jangling. We'll go with whisper, why not? a shape in the dark. I moved in with my best friend a little over a year ago now. She rents this old mobile home. It creaks and groans at night like it's alive. When I'm trying to sleep, it often sounds like someone is slowly walking around in the living room. I usually just pull a blanket up over my head and ignore it. Never mention it to her. She jumps at shadows. But last night felt different. I wasn't even in my bed yet. At around midnight, I stepped out of my room for a smoke. Then I went to the bathroom. And just as I reached for the bathroom door to go back, I clearly heard footsteps moving across the kitchen floor. I figured it was just her rummaging for like a late-night snack. But when I came out, everything was still. Kitchen light was off, no movement. I peeked into her room, and she sleeps with her door open, by the way. I saw her curled up in bed and breathing steadily. For a second, I thought we might actually have someone inside the house. The footsteps had been that loud. But then I remembered our German Shepherd. There's no way he'd sleep through a break-in, so I pushed it aside and went back to my room. The moment the door clicked shut behind me, the footsteps started again, heavy and slow. This time they moved away from the kitchen, heading toward her room. I almost opened the door to check, but if I didn't see anything the first time, why would this be any different? I decided to let it go. I didn't think about it again until tonight. So just before she went to bed, she suddenly turned to me and asked, "Do you ever, see shapes of people in the house or hear weird noises?" And that question froze me. I asked her why. She told me that last night she woke up in the dark, saw the figure of a man standing beside her bed. Not moving, but watching. She said it looked like he had either a turban or a big knot of dreadlocks on his head. She wasn't terrified, but unsettled, like her brain wasn't fully awake. She just squeezed her eyes shut and hoped it would be gone by morning. What she described sounded like a shadow figure. I've seen something like that before. They're always silent and always just there. But the thought of what I heard and what she saw happening on the same night, that's what really gets to me. Can't stop wondering what or who was walking through that kitchen. The Silent Way. This may not seem bone-chilling to adults, but to my 11-year-old self, it's the kind of fear that lingers in your chest long after the moment passes. And if the tag isn't quite right, I apologize in advance. I'll start with a little bit of background, because honestly, I've always loved that part of the story. My hometown grew slowly, but pretty steadily. It was founded in 1894. It sits between a college town and a state capital, with a long stretch of highway slicing through its center. It's a lovely place. Tree-lined streets, quiet neighborhood, an old train station that no longer runs, and community where everybody knows each other's favorite pie flavor. I like that. The high school was overcrowded by the late 90s. They built a newer, bigger one in 1970. What? The high school was late 90s. What is happening? Wait a minute. Sorry, the pedanticness in me is getting overwhelmed. The high school was overgrown by the late 1990s, so they built a newer, bigger one in 1970. Well, anyway, over time, 2 more high schools popped up on the west and south edges of town. The old one, the original brick building with creaky floors and ivy climbing up its walls, was turned into a public rental space. Businesses, small cafes, hobby classes filled its empty rooms. Some stayed, some vanished like fog. One of those businesses belonged to a local artist who rented out several classrooms for her studio and art lessons. After I showed a growing interest in drawing, my mom signed me up for classes. I'd never stepped inside the old high school before, but the moment I did, something about its dusty hallways and echoing stairwells felt both strange and inviting. My teacher, let's call her Clara, what do you know? We were warm and funny, and I took private lessons after school. Often just the two of us in a room that smelled faintly of paint and pencils and old wooden floors beneath our feet. I trusted Clara completely. After all, I'd had a bearded dragon going by the same name that wore a pretty big necklace. So we'd talk about anything, books and dreams and little mysteries, and I must have mentioned my early childhood obsession with ghost stories and lizards. She eventually told me something that made me lean in closer and said, "This building has visitors." One afternoon, I noticed this note, and it was taped to the wall behind her desk. "Sort out the wing." Curiosity got the better of me. When I asked about it, she chuckled and said, "It's just the east wing. We call it the silent wing because, well, you'll see." She agreed to take me there. The moment we stepped past that last lit hallway, the air changed. The silent wing was darker and colder. The fluorescent lights that worked everywhere else in the building, they refused to work there. Clara said electricians had checked many times. Wires were fine, circuits fine, but the lights just won't stay on. The storage room that she unlocked at the end of the corridor is the strangest of all. Windows had been blacked out with thick paint, some shattered and boarded, and inside old lockers leaned against desks with missing legs and cracked chalkboards. There's filing cabinets that had rusted shut. It felt like stepping into a forbidden lung of the building, a place that no longer breathed. Clara's voice was calm, but she lowered it slightly as she told me, "There's an old caretaker who likes this room. He's not the friendly kind. Don't worry, though. He minds his business as long as we mind ours." I laughed kind of nervously, pretending that I wasn't unsettled, but oh boy was I. A few weeks later, during one of my last classes there, painting a mural online that Clara had sketched. She was next door in a meeting, but told me to call if I needed her. The building was unusually quiet that evening. The wind outside pushed against the windows, making the old frames creak. My brush moved slowly across the wall, red into orange and orange into gold, and that's when I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, at the far end of that hallway stood a shape. A man, but not fully grainy, like somebody had drawn him with static. The air prickled on my skin. He was standing in front of the silent wing. I froze, I looked up, nothing there, and I told myself I imagined it. But a few minutes later, he was there again. Same place, same grainy outline. Turned my head fully this time. Gone, just a dark hallway. My chest tightened, and I had seen shadows before, sure. Reflections or tricks of the light. This one was a bit different. My body reacted before my mind did, and my hands went cold, the back of my neck prickled, and my breath shortened. Fear like this doesn't just like a jump scare, it sinks into your bones. I rushed to find Clara, and when I told her, she didn't laugh. She didn't tell me it was nothing, and instead her face tightened in quiet recognition. She whispered a few words into the empty hallway, almost like a warning or a request. She didn't explain. I didn't ask. A few years later, Claire moved her studio elsewhere. My mom said it was because old buildings weren't really that safe. Never found out if she meant structurally or spiritually. But to this day, when somebody mentions that part of town, I still remember the static man at the end of the silent wing watching me. The Shimmering Visitor. This is something that happened to me when I was maybe 6 or 7 years old. And as the name might suggest, almost nobody believed me. My parents and siblings certainly didn't. They thought it was just a mix of my imagination and something I'd seen on TV. But here's what actually happened. At that time, my dad was in the Air Force. We were living in one of those old base houses with creaky floors and thin walls. He had come home from a long deployment overseas, and everything felt quieter than usual, like the house was holding its breath. Everything's holding its breath. One night, after brushing my teeth, I crawled into bed, and my parents' room was at the far end of the hallway to the right, and the bathroom to my left. My brother's room was just across from mine. And I always left my door open, letting the soft bathroom light spill faintly into my room, or rather bleed into my room. As I was pulling the blanket up to my chin, I glanced at the hallway, and I saw something. It wasn't like any ghost I'd seen in movies. The shape was about as tall as a laundry basket tipped upright. It didn't have a solid body, more like a floating puzzle made of tiny shards. They were shifting and slanting against each other. The colors were soft, almost pearly, as if light was trapped inside of it. For a second, I might have called it beautiful, if not for its face. The face wasn't really a face at all. Just a dark hollow where, like sharp slanted eyes and a stretched mouth formed out of nothing, it seemed. It tilted toward me slowly, like it had all the time in the world. And then it turned away and glided soundlessly down the hallway toward my parents' room. Terrified, I yanked the blanket over my head. I must have fallen asleep at some point because the next morning I didn't remember a thing. Not until I was back in bed that night. As soon as I lay down, the memory came rushing back to me. I told myself I wouldn't look. I did though, and I always did. And there it was again. Same strange shimmer, same slow turn, same silent drift into my parents' room. And every night for nearly a week, same thing happened. I would see it, hide, forget, and then remember. One Saturday morning, I woke up, and for once the memory didn't fade with the daylight. I ran straight to the kitchen to tell my mom everything, how it looked, how it moved, how it never made a sound. I told her it reminded me of a ghost I'd once seen in a cartoon. She just laughed and said that I'd been dreaming too much, but I knew what I saw. That night was the first night it didn't appear, and it never came back after that. Sometimes I wonder if it followed my dad home, like something that wasn't supposed to be here but slipped through anyway. Or maybe it was only ever in my head. Either way, I've never forgotten the way it turned to look at me. The Watcher Behind the Glass. This is going to be my experience encountering a shadow figure at work. A bit of backstory. I used to work the night shift as a security guard at a university, mostly during the peak of COVID lockdowns. The campus sat near a quiet canal, and many of its buildings were more than a century old. And since there were barely any people around, my shifts were long and silent, and often completely alone. If anybody was on campus besides me, they weren't supposed to be there. The building at the center of this story was the old science hall, a 5-story structure that had been around for maybe 110 years. It sat on a slope with a narrow path running behind it through a patch of trees. The path was poorly maintained and had no lights, so at night the only glow came from the faint blinking of equipment inside the classrooms. So, it's around 2:45 in the morning. It's when I headed down that path for my usual patrol, and as I neared the back entrance of the science hall, a strange weight settled in my chest. Not fear exactly, but a heavy kind of pressure that made my skin all weird. I remember instinctively keeping my eyes straight ahead and avoiding the dark windows. Then, without warning, the unease seemed to lift, and it was like stepping out of fog. And just as I was about to clear the alley, I caught something moving on the glass. A shape, tall and still, like a silhouette pressed flat against the window. It slid along as I walked, keeping pace, and there was no way for it to be my shadow. The light source wasn't even behind me. I told myself it had to be a trick of the dim lighting. But when I finally turned to check again, the shape didn't follow me. It just stayed in one window watching. I bolted back to the office without finishing the round. The next afternoon, when I came in early to switch shifts, I asked the day guard to walk to check the classroom behind that window. The door plaque was faded, but inside was some kind of old biology lab. Rows of jars and preserved specimens. They were stored in a locked cabinet. A long wall of shelves with cloudy glass containers. The guy looked at me and asked if what I saw had been taller than a person, maybe 7 feet or so. When I nodded, he just sighed and said that I wasn't the first. Apparently, several cleaning staff years before had quit after finding wet footprints leading in and out of that same room. It was long after it was locked for the night. I don't know if I'd call whatever it was evil, but it didn't feel like it belonged there, and it definitely didn't want me there. Whispers on the ceiling. I, a 30-year-old female, have had plenty of strange, hard-to-explain experiences over the years. And this one happened not too long ago, and honestly, creeps me out even right now. A few weeks ago, my girlfriend at the time, a 23-year-old female, and I, we decided to exchange Reiki healing sessions together. And I've been a certified Reiki practitioner for nearly a decade, though I'd stepped away from it for a while. A few years back, I had some unsettling encounters with what felt like wandering energies being drawn to the sessions I held. But Reiki has always been something that I love, and picking it up again felt like slipping into something familiar and warm. The morning after our session, sitting in my living room, that's when I noticed something odd on the wall above my bookshelf. At first, I thought maybe it was just a trick of the light, but when I looked directly at it, the shape didn't vanish, it stayed there. It was solid and quiet for a couple of seconds. It wasn't just a blur. The shadow was small, maybe the size of a toddler. It moved in a way that made my stomach drop. It looked like it was climbing across the wall slowly. I tried to shake it off. I told myself it could be anything. Light from the window or passing car or whatever. That evening, my dog started acting weird too, and he's normally the chillest boy. But suddenly, he let out this deep, sharp bark and stared straight up at the same spot in the wall. Hackles up, low growl, completely focused. I turned on the brightest lamp in the room, thinking maybe there was a moth or something. Nothing, absolutely nothing. And that's when my witch brain went, nope, not today. I opened the back door wide, started clapping sharply, and said out loud, "You don't belong here. This is not your home. Out now." That was my rendition. I sprinkled a line of salt along the baseboard and whispered a short protection blessing I learned years ago. Within minutes, the air felt lighter. My dog relaxed. Haven't seen or felt anything like it since. And here's the thing I've learned over the years, like you don't owe wandering spirits your space or your energy. They can't linger without some form of permission, conscious or not. Once I got a spirit to leave me alone just by saying a clear, firm no and meaning it, we're stronger than we think. Whispers in the Winter House. When I was a teenager in the late 90s, strange things began happening in the small old house where I grew up. It wasn't all at once, just little things at first, so small I'd brush them off. Creaking sounds would echo through the hallway, even when no one's home, and it was like somebody dragging their fingernails along the wall, that kind of thing. Kitchen sink would suddenly gush water at full blast in the middle of the night, even though the handle was stiff and hard to turn. Our bathroom light, an ancient pulled chain lamp, would flick on and off like somebody was playing with it. And once, on a windy night, I heard something rubbing rhythmically against the wooden wall just outside my room. It went on for hours, almost like a bear scratching its back on a sort of barky tree, but inside the house. And when I pulled the curtains next morning, I expected to see an old lilac bush swaying, but it wasn't there. My mom had cut it down a week earlier. And for a while, I thought I was just paranoid. I mean, I am me. Always seemed to happen when I was the only one home, and one night I'm laying in bed and I heard heavy footsteps moving across the kitchen tile. Sounded like a man wearing boots. The steps stopped right where the linoleum met the carpet in the hallway, then turned around and walked back. I told myself it was just her dog. When I got up, there's no dog in the kitchen. Doors were bolted and all the windows were locked tight. I stood there with my heart thumping, and in the quiet, I heard it again. The same steady footsteps. I ran back to my room, pulled the blanket over my head, and tried to hum myself to sleep. And I never told anyone back then. I figured maybe my brain was playing tricks on me. And then one night it all just stopped, like somebody flipped a switch. No more footsteps, no more weird lights. I lived in that house for another 3 years before moving out. My mom still lives there, and I visit her every Christmas. Years later, not long after the lockdowns ended, I was visiting my younger sister. We were both in our 40s, and for the first time ever, she brought up those weird nights in the house, as she put it. So she'd heard them too, and my stomach dropped. She told me one afternoon when her mom was away, she and a friend had tried a Ouija board for fun. They thought they were talking to some man or something. They pretended to be one, and after that, she said the strange noises became constant. She heard footsteps, not just inside, but on the roof. And the part that gave me goosebumps was when she told me about the morning she was vacuuming her room before work. She accidentally sucked up a sock. She opened the machine, even sifted through the dust bag. Couldn't find that sock. She gave up, went to shower, and when she came back, the sock was lying perfectly folded on her bed and clean. Her friend had gotten so terrified that she told my mom, and I'd have no idea any of this had even happened. So that night, a bit shaken, I messaged my mom to ask what she remembered. And my mom, now almost 80 and still deeply religious, she didn't hesitate. She said she heard the pipes banging and the taps turning on by themselves, and the cat staring at the ceiling for ages. She also told me that after my sister confessed about the Ouija board, she went to the library. She read up on how to get rid of spirits, as she put it. Spent a whole night praying. Finally, she walked down to the river near her house and, in her words, sent it away with the water. I'd never known any of this. To me, it just stopped, and even now typing this out, I get chills, and it all sounds so impossible. But somehow, every piece fits. The third spot at the table. Okay, so this happened last night while I was making late dinner. So yeah, not even a full day ago. Sorry for any typos, I'm on my phone. For some quick context, this isn't my first time experiencing something kind of off or hard to explain. But I'm not somebody who looks for paranormal stuff. Had a few, maybe you could call them weird moments over the years, but they were always spaced pretty far apart. So I, a 23-year-old female, was in my apartment. I've lived here for almost a year and a half now. My girlfriend was sitting at the table, or not sitting at the table, but setting the table, and asked me to grab some plates from the living room cabinet. I went, I got them, and I came back. But the second I stepped into the kitchen, something felt different. I couldn't even focus on what she was saying, because my brain was trying to figure out what exactly was wrong. The air suddenly felt heavier, like the room wasn't just holding the two of us, but someone else as well. I became very aware of my right side, like something was standing quietly between me and the refrigerator. There's about a meter of space there. Really hard to explain that kind of sensation. Not cold exactly, but like a dense pocket of air. I froze for a second, let myself feel it, and I swear something was there. Now, maybe I should have just ignored the weird feeling. Maybe if I had forced myself to focus on the plates or on her voice, nothing would have happened. But I didn't. I turned my head slowly. And as I moved, I caught sight of something from the corner of my eye, and I saw her. A little girl, maybe 10, maybe 11. She wasn't blurry like a shadow, but she really wasn't crystal clear either. More like catching a reflection at a strange angle. She had shoulder-length hair, pale face that wasn't smiling or frowning, just there. I noticed the collar of her dress and how her hands were hanging still at her sides. The second I fully focused on her, she vanished. Not in a dramatic flash, just gone, like I'd been looking at her through a fogged-up window and somehow wiped it clean. But the feeling, that presence, it didn't leave. If anything, it pressed in closer to me. All of this, from the moment I walked in to seeing her disappear, happened in maybe 2 or 3 minutes. My whole body was tense and covered in goosebumps, and I wasn't terrified like in a nightmare, but I was deeply unsettled. My girlfriend didn't notice a single thing. I must look pretty pale. She asked me twice if I was okay, and I just said I was tired. For some reason, telling her about what I saw right then felt wrong, like speaking about it out loud would make it worse. So I helped her finish dinner like nothing happened. It took about half an hour for the feeling to finally fade. This morning I told her everything. She laughed, not in a mean way, but like she thought I was exaggerating, and I wish I was, honestly. I don't know what to make of it. Was it real? Was it just my brain glitching? I always felt the apartment had a strange energy, but nothing like that. Keep wondering if it'll happen again, and honestly, I don't know what scares me more, that it won't or that it will. Whispers between the shelves. During my final stretch of high school, around 1.5 years, I had a small part-time job at our local library. I worked 2 evenings a week as a student page, mostly reshelving returned books and kind of wandering up and down the aisles a lot. Place wasn't exactly huge, and if I started at one end, walked to the other, it'd take me maybe 40 seconds tops. Although I do have long legs, and apparently I walk like I'm late to everything. Sort of like a daddy long legs in a hurry. And to give some background before the actual weird bit, during my very first week there, July 2021, I think, I went into the staff washroom to wash my hands. I was just reaching for the sink when the motion sensor tap turned itself on and kept running. Usually it'll shut itself off within a few seconds, especially if no one's there. But this time it stayed on for almost a full minute. I wasn't even near it to trigger it. I told my older coworker about it a few months later. And they'd been working there for 5 or 6 years, and none of them had ever seen that happen. Could have just been a sensor glitch, but stuck in the back of my mind. As time went on, we sometimes swapped little odd things stories during, like, slow closing shifts and things like that. It's a small town library, and things were quiet at night, and if we spent 10 minutes chatting by the desk, no one would mind. Now I got used to the usual noises of the building. Books shifting on their shelves, the old wooden wall settling in the winter cold, because Canadian winters are no joke, by the way. And the occasional creak, maybe somewhere in the kids section. I often worked with one earbud in at low volume, and I know what my music sounds like, and this was not that. And sometimes I was sure I heard somebody moving around at the back, like footsteps, light but clear, and whatever I walked over to at the section would be empty, and 2 coworkers always at the front desk, and most nights after 7 p.m., patrons were pretty rare. Once or twice I caught a glimpse of something dark out of the corner of my eye. Just a flicker or a shape that was gone when I would turn. And honestly, it could have just been my imagination. The shelves are tall and black, and lighting isn't exactly cozy. The night I'll never forget, though, was at the end of August, 2022. My last shifts before I was moving away for university. Just me, a coworker my age, we're going to call him Adam, and one of the senior staff, a woman named Francine, who's a bit spiritual. It was 10 minutes to closing, building completely silent except for the humming lights. Adam and I are at the front desk chatting while Francine was right by the entrance. They were turning the key in the door. Then we both heard it, the very specific, unmistakable crash of an entire row of books being shoved off a shelf. I'd made that exact noise by accident once, so I knew it immediately. It was not subtle. I actually froze and looked at A, and he looked at me with the same expression. We hurried to the back wall where it had come from. Not a single book out of place. Not on the floor, not even leaning awkwardly. I had just done the closing. Maybe 5 minutes earlier I did that walkthrough. No patrons anywhere. Francine, who was literally a meter away, didn't hear a thing. If Adam hadn't have heard it too, I honestly would have thought I imagined it. But he did. Thank you very much for listening. Sweet dreams. See ya.
Dare to explore the extraordinary with Paranormal M. Subscribe and turn on notifications to be the first to experience our latest stories that push the boundaries of belief. Get ready for an unforgettable journey. Story number 1, The Old Man. Since I'm a kid, I've been experiencing some paranormal things, but the one that I want to tell you is one of my first real, unexplained experiences. It started when I was around 13 years old. I came back from college, and I was living in an apartment on the 2nd floor. Every day I used to take the elevator, walking with a heavy backpack plus a long day at school. But this day, even though I grabbed the elevator handle, I let it go. I've never been able to tell why, but something deep inside me told me not to take the elevator. Nothing happened with it, just so you know. So I took the stairs. When I arrived at my floor, in the door to the corridor, there was a small window so you could see the stairs through it. It was kind of tall, so kids couldn't look through it. Don't know if that's clear. I froze for a second. I saw an old, creepy man standing in the doorway, looking at me. I froze for a second, and then immediately think it was someone visiting one of my neighbors. There was 4 apartments on every floor. I'd never seen this man before, so I knew it was not one of my neighbors. I grabbed the handle, and I was about to say hi, but as soon as I grabbed it, the face completely vanished. For as long as I thought it was hallucinations or pareidolia, but after that, I didn't tell anyone for years. Some weird stuff started to happen. Things even in an apartment, you can't debunk it. But I kind of try to forget about it. Forget his face looking gray and empty. But 6 years later, my adorable nephew, aged 1 and 1.5, when it happened, was genuinely running in my house while we were in the pool. Her mom was checking on him, when suddenly he walks backwards, pointing at the sofa, starting to cry. We immediately asked what was going on, and he asked who the man was under the sofa. I literally have goosebumps writing this. And at first, we thought maybe an intruder, because we had the entrance door one day next to the garden, on one of the back of the house where my dad comes after work. But, of course, my sister didn't see anything, so he starts to cry, and he said word for word, "But Mommy, there's an old man lying under the sofa." He was very advanced for his age, and so he was already starting to talk very well. 3 years later, he claimed to see the same guy. This time, he didn't get scared of him. He told us it was an old man with gray skin, tall, and he was just standing right next to me and my mom. The way he described him immediately reminded me of the man I saw. Today, I'm pretty sure that's the same person we both saw, but I don't know who it is. Story number 2. Monsters Among Us. This is a story according to my mother's experience, when she was a teenager living in a remote village in one of the islands in the Philippines. This happened in the 70s. My mother told me when she first got into high school, she had a seatmate who shares the same name as her. Other than their names, my mother recalled they also share the same interest with music and arts. They instantly clicked, and they became friends. One day, my mother's friends skipped school without notifying their teachers. It was a small village, and most people already knew where each family lives. My mother, being a good friend, thought to visit her friend's house after school to check up on her. Before she got to her friend's house, which is located along the riverbank, several of her classmates stopped her on the way, telling her to never go to that house. My mother said, "Nah, no man. Why though?" And her classmate said, "Que sila mo kwano tao," because they eat people. Forgive my attempt at that. Now, this is not new to my mother. She knew about these rumors at the village, but she never believed these type of accusations. She even shared lunches with her friend. The food they shared didn't taste weird. Her friend acts like every other normal person, so she treats her like anybody else. As everybody should. My mother went ahead despite the warnings of her classmates. Now keep in mind that it all happened around 4 or 5 in the afternoon. The sun was still up, and it was still bright in the riverbank. My mother wasn't scared at all until from afar she saw a woman crouching at the riverbed in the shallow part of the river. She initially thought this woman was washing clothes, or maybe peeing in the river. This woman had a long, frizzy, white-haired head and appeared to be wearing a long black dress with its hem already wet by the river's water. My mother kept walking, but when she came closer to the woman, she heard this woman was talking to herself. The woman was covering her face with her palms, whispering, "I hope the sun sets soon, I hope the sun sets soon," over and over. This scared the shit out of my mother. She began sprinting to my grandparents' home. Back home, she thought that the woman that she saw could have been a person with a mental illness, so she tried to forget about it, and she just slept. My mother lives in a nipa hut. Their source of light was only a candle lamp, and they didn't have a mattress. They sleep on the bamboo floors with several cracks on it. At 12 midnight, as my mother thought, she felt movements under the floorboards. She was laying with her back on the floor, but she could feel something or someone is crawling underneath. That's when on her peripheral, she saw long, bony fingers slowly emerging between the floorboards. The fingers were poking in and out of the floorboards as if it was looking for something to feel. It went away for a bit and my mother thought it was gone, until my mother felt the fingers now poking on her back. Then it felt like the fingers were digging into her skin, pinching her. It was so painful she couldn't breathe. She couldn't even make a sound because she was so scared. All she could do is endure the pain and cry silently. That's when the house cat, the hero on this story, bolted outside, knocking down their candle lamp, waking the grandparents. My grandfather, a hunter, took a bolo, a machete, and chased the house cat outside as it appeared to be fighting something. That's when my grandfather saw this big black bird trying to get away from the claws of the cat as it turned into a freaking wild boar before fleeing. My grandfather, even in shock, shouted, "Don't ever come back here, or I will hunt you all." My grandfather guarded the whole house, making rounds all throughout the night until sunrise. My mother never saw her friend since then. A Fisherman's Tale. When my grandparents were still a young couple, they had a fisherman neighbor. Every morning, after fishing at the river, the fisherman will sell whatever he caught at his stall in the village. My grandmother, a frequent customer, became friends with the fisherman. Whenever my grandmother is short of money, the kind fisherman will let my grandmother borrow a fish. One day, my grandmother walked past the stall and noticed neighbors in front. The neighbors said it's been a while since the fisherman last sold fish, so they're hoping that he'll arrive today due to an upcoming feast in the village. One elderly suggested that she's going to go fetch the fisherman at his house. Since the fisherman is also her friend, my grandmother offered to come along. When they arrived outside the fisherman's house, all windows were shut and the door was locked. The elder called out and the fisherman shouted, "Get away!" The elder asked the fisherman what was going on, but the fisherman refused to open the door. My grandmother replied, "Dodong, it's me." Hearing a familiar voice, surprisingly, the fisherman opened the door and invited the elderly and my grandmother inside. Inside, they saw scattered salt and a bamboo spear. The fisherman looked dirty and disheveled. My grandmother asked why he hasn't been selling fish, and the neighbors are starting to worry. The fisherman said he thinks the family at the end of the river is going after him, and he's so scared he can't even leave his house. According to the fisherman, it all started a couple of days ago. While fishing in the river on his usual routine, the fisherman noticed a man watching him from afar. This happened multiple times on different days, but didn't think it was weird. He knew this man, and his wife lives at the end of the river. Since nobody at the village bothered to befriend this mysterious couple, the fisherman decided to visit the couple and say hi. When he arrived, the fisherman said, "Gusto kaba ug itza para sa poniduto." "Do you folks want to fish for lunch?" The man told the fisherman that they don't have money for the fish and he can catch a fish on his own. The fisherman said he didn't need their money. He was only there to introduce himself since he always sees the man at the river. The couple thanked the fisherman, and to repay his kindness, they offered the fisherman to have lunch at their house, which the fisherman gladly accepted. The wife cleaned the fish outside while the man gathered firewood. The fisherman was asked to wait inside the bamboo house. While inside, he thought to himself, "They're going to need salt to season the fish." Without asking the owners of the house, who were both busy preparing lunch outside, the fisherman went to the kitchen to look for salt. He couldn't find salt on the containers on the shelves, so he began looking at the jars under the sink. That's when he smelled foul odor underneath. He continued to look through the jars still. He opened one jar and was horrified with what he had discovered. Inside one of the jars, he saw severed baby fingers. Scared for his life, he crawled silently towards the salon, which is a crawl space leading outside. For a second, he thought of going back for his fishing gears that he had left, but he was petrified that he may not come out alive. He ran as fast as he could without looking back. Knowing he had already ran far enough, he looked back and was shocked that he saw the man a couple of feet away from him. He said the man looked so angry, clenching his fists and foaming at the mouth. The fisherman felt a shiver run down his spine and he peed in his pants. He began running again while screaming prayers. When he arrived at the village, he locked himself in his home. Every night since then, he can see eyes peeking at the corners of his windows. Other times there would be footsteps at his roof. And what scars him the most is when he hears someone whistling or psst sounds, like it's taunting him to come out. He said these creatures cannot come inside the house as he protected himself with the bamboo spike that he made, and because the salt is scattered inside the house. After a week, the fisherman decided to leave the village. He didn't say anything to anyone, nor to my grandmother. He simply vanished and was never to be seen again. Rumors spread at the village like a wildfire. Some think the story was a hoax, thinking the fisherman had already lost his mind from losing his wife due to childbirth a couple years prior. Some believe it's true, including my grandparents. Most of the time, the story was only used to scare naughty kids to prevent them from playing at the river, or to prevent them from staying up late at night. As time goes by, These fears had calmed down, and everybody, including the couple at the river, just simply continued living. Ask Reddit. I'm 40, but back when I was 14 or 15, my uncle left my parents' chalet for a few weeks deep in the wilderness north of Quebec. Took bloody ages to get there. No civilization, no neighbors for miles. I love that place. Huge terrain. And best of all, there is a river running through the terrain. The water was cold and crystal pure. Came directly from the mountains, I guess. The river had a really strong current, too. And the deepest I had was about to my torso, which is probably 4 feet deep, and it was impossible to stand against the current. One day I grabbed my floating board, and I decided to go on a hike along the river on the shore for a good while, and eventually just hop on my board and let the current take me back to the chalet. I never really thought about what was in the woods. In all my times at the chalet, I've seen a bunch of deer and a couple of brown bears. Pretty much it. Bears can be scary, but they never really do anything. None of that passed my mind when I started hiking. There was awesome sights on the hike. Saw a baby bear drinking water in the river on the other side of the shore. So cute. Then I remembered mother bears are always with their cubs and super protective. I was a bit scared, to be honest. But when the mom came out of the bushes, she looked at me, barely noticed, and just walked back away in the forest with her cub. I wasn't even a nuisance to her. Me and all my 125 pounds when wet, skinny kid didn't stress her at all. I walked 4 hours, carefree. What's the worst that could happen? Can't get lost. I just followed the river back to the camp. Freaking idiot. I get to a spot where trees and branches start to get hard to pass by, and the water seems pretty deep. I want to remain as close to the river as possible not to get lost, but I cannot pass. Gotta walk a bit further away from the river and into the forest. I can somewhat see the river through the branches on my left side. Nothing to worry about. That's when I hear something on my right. I didn't even turn to look. Lots of sound can be heard in the forest all around. I'm used to it. But then, man, that feeling of dread. Something is definitely not right. I'm not hearing anything. No birds, not the wind, frickin' silence. But the air feels heavy. I just freeze in my steps, can't move, paralyzed. I look at my right super slowly. There's this huge black mass, about 15 feet away from me. 2 bright little round glowing yellow eyes in the middle, and that thing is not moving at all either. Both completely immobile. Me and it. As I look at it more, it's a friggin' wolf. Pitch black looking wolf. It was bigger than that mama bear I saw earlier. Why the is it not moving? And the only thing that came to mind was one day when one of my cats was playing outside. I remember seeing and laughing as my cat became super immobile. I called it and it didn't respond. And noticed the cat was preying a bird not far away. The cat moved slow into position and then darted at the bird. That's what crossed my mind, but I was the bird. 15 feet away on my right, the wolf, still immobile, looking at me, about 10 feet on my left. The river, but there was tons of branches and bushes in the way. Forget it. I sprinted through the bushes and branches, smacking my face a dozen times, but minor cuts on my arms and legs from running directly through the bushes and just dove into the river. It was pretty deep from the side of the shore. In my little floating board, I swam to the middle of the river and the current took me right up. I don't even know if that thing came at me as I got away, or if I scared it. I never looked back. I told my uncle about the frickin' huge wolf. He laughed at me and said all the years he's been at that place, he never saw a single wolf. That there's no wolf in that area, in fact. Must have been my imagination, he said. I often see those goddamn tiny glowing dots whenever I'm in the forest. Those glowing dot eyes. Ask Reddit. When I was a theater studies student in the Midlands of England, we had to take our little theater company on tour around the local rural countryside as part of the practical side of the course. Being a proper London girl, I wasn't best pleased with the prospect of quote-unquote roughing it. In a 10-person van, there were 15 of us in the company, but for the sake of my art, I stopped being a silly tart and threw myself into it with enthusiasm. One day we broke down in the middle of nowhere, and by the time the AA bloke got to us, and in turn by the time we got to the campsite, all the spaces in the campsite had been taken. We had 3 performances locally the next day. It had gone from 8 p.m. and it was almost pitch dark. We didn't have many options left open to us. Our director said it would be best if we drove the van into the nearby forest and all sleep in the van for the night. And as it was too late to continue driving around and having an early start the following day, we reluctantly agreed. We found a quiet part of the forest that was open with not many trees, and by 9:30 we were settled in the van, if a little cramped and cold. We were all 19 or 20-year-olds, and it was a big adventure. At around 11:30, I was stirred awake by one of my colleagues screaming and another bloke saying, "This is so bad, we're so screwed." To my complete horror through my sleep, blurred eyes, I saw that our little van was completely surrounded by about 50 men, dressed in what appeared to be old-fashioned rural farming clothes, with homemade torches all burning brightly. I started panicking but didn't scream, couldn't take my eyes off the men. They were moving, inch, didn't have any expression on their face, not even when they bibbed and horned at them. 2 of the blokes even got out of the van and shouted at the men, to the total horror of everybody else. Nothing. Needless to say, we were all terrified. Every time we tried to move the van, the men moved a step forward. At 1:30, all the men suddenly just turned around and walked away through the trees. We were absolutely knackered, too tired to drive anywhere else, so we took turns in keeping watch in case the men came back. They never did. Ask Reddit. Not something I saw, but something I heard. I was in upstate New York hunting in the woods during deer season last year. I'd gotten to the stand I was going to sit in during pre-dawn hours, so it was still incredibly dark. I wasn't scared. Even though it was my first time being in the woods while it was that dark, it was actually really exciting to be out there. And I was really looking forward to possibly getting a monster buck. I would talk about that for years, whose points would be just kind of keep growing with every retelling of the story, right? Anyhow, there I was, sitting in the dark, in freezing-ish autumn temperatures, with a rifle across my lap. I was like 10 feet off the ground, too, so that also kept my nerves in check. It was so quiet and dark. I wasn't used to that. I just wanted the damn sun to come up so I could start to warm up a little, and so I'd have enough light to take a good clean shot. I was dressed warm enough, but my father-in-law advised me against wearing thick gloves so I could shoot without them getting in my way, in case I needed to take a quick shot. So my hands were freezing cold, and I kept warming them up in my pockets, armpits, and by breathing on them. I'm not sure how long I was out there, but it felt like hours, and it was so damn dark. I think it was a little cloudy too, because I don't remember being able to see the stars, and there was a minimal amount of moonlight. My eyes kept playing tricks on me in the darkness. I was told deer can be unnaturally quiet, so I kept scanning the shadows and thinking I would see something moving. but it would quickly turn out to be nothing each time. There was no wind, no rain, nothing else happening. Everything was very still. After a while of nothing, out of nowhere I heard a thumping sound. It sounded like a deer thump, like one you could feel in your chest, and it started off slow, then quickly picked up pace like if someone was thumping on their chest. Something like that. I don't know what it was, but I assumed that it was a male turkey, a gobbler, drumming, because I heard something similar when looking up turkey calls. It only happened once, then it was quiet again for what seemed like another long stretch of time. I thought to myself, cool, I wonder what that was. And then something different happened. Another sound started up, but I couldn't for the life of me imagine what could make this sound. It started off low and then picked up volume slowly until it decently was audible, to where it sounded like someone dragging a cardboard box across carpet. It came from in a direction maybe like 50 yards away from my stand, and seemed to remain in one spot. Went on for a very long time and would quiet down to a whisper, then slowly pick up volume again, over and over and over and over. I couldn't explain it. It was continuous, keeping the same rhythm and staying in the same spot. Thought maybe it was wind, but nothing was moving, no leaves, branches, or anything. And it wasn't raining either. Otherwise, I would feel and hear it all around, and the sound stayed in the same distance from me, only changing in pitch. I've never heard anything like it in the woods before and haven't since. After a while of this, the sound slowly quieted down until it was completely gone, and all was quiet in the woods again. Then a few minutes later, the sun started coming up. Birds started singing, squirrels started moving about in the leaves, and everything else started to wake up. It was the strangest fucking thing. I stayed in the stand another hour or two before my father-in-law came looking for me. We were on his land. He fetched me to head back to the house, which was quite a ways from the spot that we were at in the woods. We talked all the way back, and I told him how I didn't see a single damn deer and how chilly it was. He chuckled and gave me tips and other pieces of wisdom for the next hunt. Eventually the house was in view, and we were walking out of the woods. I didn't want to sound stupid, and I didn't want to ask in case it was nothing, but my curiosity had gotten the better of me by that point, and I really wanted to know what I heard out there. I told him about the thumping sound, and he nodded and said it was probably some kind of animal, although he wasn't sure what. He didn't seem fazed, though. I nodded, and then I told him, I heard something else too, but I'm not sure what. I explained the whole thing to him the best that I could, and he listened without saying anything or nodding or making any sort of facial expression. And then he changed the subject. I wasn't unsettled about the damn sound until that very moment, because that was just strange to me that he didn't acknowledge what I just told him. I let it go, and I didn't ask again. I did ask my brother-in-law about it later, but he couldn't explain it either. He said it was probably everything warming up and all the vegetation defrosting, but I told him how the sound seemed to only come from one direction and stay in the same general area, and how nothing else was moving at all. It was incredibly dark, but I could still see enough to make out that there were no leaves, branches, trees, and nothing was moving. He couldn't explain it, and the only thing that he could say was, it's really weird. And that was that. None of my buddies at work could explain it. I haven't heard anything like that since. Ask Reddit. I spent a lot of time in my mother's father's house in the woods. This was in the woods of Michigan. My brother and I got lost a lot, but if we could find the train tracks, we could always get back. One time when I was about 8 and my brothers were like 11 or 12, he didn't want me bothering him and ran away, leaving me alone in the woods. I was crying and just wandering around when I came to a house with 2 horses in the pasture. I went and knocked on the door for help. This lady who looked like a fucking older librarian answered and looked really shocked. I whined about my brother leaving me, and she told me to stay at the door while she went back for something, and then she came out to walk me home. I was telling her about the train tracks. She said that she knew where they were. So we get to the tracks, and I'm cheering and pointing in the direction of my grandpa's house. And I turned back, and she was just gone, no trace of her. I went ahead and crossed the tracks and followed the path to the house. My brother was already back, and they were literally all outside about to go looking for me. Grandma had made dinner, and we all went in to eat. I told Grandma that I just wanted to bake cookies for the lady that helped me. She thought that it was one of the neighbors, until I said she had 2 pretty horses. Apparently, none of the neighbors had horses. When I said her house was on the opposite side of the tracks, she said that that was all thick woods and there were only houses on this side of the tracks. I was adamant about what I saw and where I saw this lady and her house. So the next day, Grandma packed a bunch of sandwiches up for a picnic in the woods to see where I saw the lady and her house. It was a long walk, but we made it to the pasture, except there was no house and no horses. The only thing in the pasture was my hat that I lost while wandering around before finding the lady's house. We still had our picnic, not sure if it was a ghost or fae. Ask Reddit. In Wales, more like a story of what I didn't see, but still. I was 13 years old and I lived in a tiny little village. And one day my dog escaped the back garden and went on an adventure by himself. Concerned about him getting into a field with livestock, I went looking for him around the village and remembered that there was a patch of woodland up on a hill that I'd never been to before. I could imagine the dog would love it there, so I went to check it out. I reached the woods and began to call out the dog's name, hoping he'd come bounding out of the woods. But no sign, so I went further in. I came to a pretty large clearing, and suddenly I felt a little creeped out. I suddenly didn't want to call out for the dog anymore, thought I should be getting home. I left the clearing and began to hurry back the way I came. Only this time I could hear something. There were very clear sounds of footsteps in the dry leaves following behind me, and I mean right behind me, as though someone was walking close enough for me to touch them. Only there was nothing there. I kept stopping to look around, and the footsteps would quickly stop as well. My skin was crawling, but I had a strong sense that I shouldn't run, so I forced myself to keep walking calmly. But I was completely terrified. I managed to walk about 10 steps with the mysterious sounds keeping pace until my nerve went and I broke into a mad run. The worst part is that the moment I ran, I heard a weird, high-pitched little giggle coming from behind me. I got the hell out of there and I never went back. The dumb dog was waiting for me, having made his way home. I'm glad he didn't go into the woods. Might have been dog-napped by the pixies. Ask Reddit. This happened to me and my family very recently. My paternal grandma was dying of cancer, so I made the effort to fly out to see her one last time in December of last year. For some context, my grandpa died at home from his 4th heart attack in 2018, and I have a few other relatives and ancestors who died at the home as well. It's a very old farmhouse, probably built in the late 1800s, that my family purchased when they arrived in the States in the early 1900s. Needless to say, my family roots run deep through that place and the land surrounding it. Prior to my ancestors arriving, the land was heavily populated by the Wabasha tribes. Every year, the tractors till up buckets of more artifacts. So many, in fact, that neither the museums or the local tribal agencies have room for them, and simply ask for us to keep what we find, so long as we find it on our land. Otherwise, leave it be. So as you can tell, there's a lot of history going on. I think contributes to the weird supernatural shit going on. Anyway, while my grandma was dying, the farmhouse was rife with paranormal activity. It was actually pretty damn freaky. Nobody could figure out why such things were happening. We'd hear everything from loud, obvious footsteps throughout the house that could last for minutes, to hearing things being shuffled around, seeing things move on their own, seeing figures and forms darting this way and that. They weren't just old house noises or animals running about. These were extremely obvious happenings with no obvious reasoning behind them. I got worried that we were all going crazy or dying of carbon monoxide poisoning or mold toxicity or both. But we had working carbon monoxide detectors in almost every room, and my family had done a pretty good job at locating and killing any mold in the house. I also hypothesized that it could be funky EMFs caused by old wiring, that we were fucking with us maybe, but the wiring was redone in the mid-90s to make the house safer, and my jack-of-all-trades family had been keeping it updated for electronics and safety shit. Finally, my grandma was having a lot of near-death visions of loved ones. Most notably, she told me her twin sister had come by to visit, saying that she and my grandma would spend Christmas together. I knew my grandma had a twin sister, but what I didn't know was her twin sister died in 2016. When I told my dad, who is a rather obnoxious atheist, I'll add, what Grandma told me, he was speechless for a moment before telling me that my grandma's twin had died several years ago from lung cancer. With all that out of the way, one of the strangest things out of all of this happened when me and a bunch of my family, my dad, uncles, aunt, handful of cousins, were all seated around the dining room table at night, playing cards and telling stories. My grandma had run out of steam a couple hours before and had gone to bed. Somehow our conversation turned towards the strange happenings in the house, as well as my grandpa's passing. Jokingly, one of my cousins said, "If Grandpa's here with Grandma, can you do something to make yourself known?" Right away, an antique cabinet drawer right next to my cousin's chair swung open with force, and a stack of papers slid out. Upon further inspection, the yellowed, stained papers that slid out were a handful of bird drawings my grandpa had done in elementary school. It was called My Bird Book, signed his name, and included 10 drawings of his favorite local birds. It was both freaky and comforting, to say the least. Ask Reddit. About 2 or 3 years ago, I was working for Cox Communications. It's an internet service, and being one of the representatives, they would send me around to different Best Buy locations as a third party to sell internet. One of the locations I was going to, I'd never been to before, and it was, I want to say, a few nights before the day I was going to happen and I was going to be going to this new location that I had a dream about already being there. In my dream, I had to walk into the back room where it was like a warehouse that had all of these washers and dryers and dishwashers. And in my dream, I had a conversation with somebody I couldn't really see their face, but I kind of remember the conversation. Fast forward a few days later, and I'm at my normal location at my job. My boss calls me and tells me he needs me to go to the Maryland Parkway store. That's the store that I've never been to. I go, and once I'm there, a customer needed to speak to the manager and saw me, and asked if I could help her get to one of them. So I saw a manager go into the warehouse in the back of the Best Buy, and I went to go get him. I felt this tingling feeling when I was walking, and ignored it. Then I walked into the back, and bam! Washers and dryers and dishwashers everywhere. I was standing right where I was in my dream, seeing everything I was seeing. thought I was dreaming again, but then the manager came to me and said, "You need something?" And just like my dream, even though I didn't see his face in the dream, we had the same exact conversation. It's been happening here and there lately, but that was the strongest connection I've ever had with the dream. Don't know if anybody else experiences this. Story number 11. Another Ask Reddit. So before my mother met my father, she was married once before. Let's call him Charlie. My mother adored Charlie, and for good reason from what I'm told. Charlie was kind, patient, and he loved my mother dearly. He didn't have a gecko. One night, my mother woke up to a horrific gargling noise. She looked over at Charlie to find he was choking on his own vomit. No alcohol involved, mind you. By the time the ambulance arrived, he was gone. My mother's grief was profound, but life keeps moving. Eventually. So did she. 4 to 5 years later, my parents wed, and he had me. Apparently, I would often speak to myself in my room. I was around 2-ish, old enough to hold a rudimentary conversation. My mother and father assumed it was simply the innocent rambling of a toddler, thought nothing of it. Time passes, and she starts to worry. Feeling emboldened to ask about it, she enters my room and interrupts my lonely conversation with, "Who are you speaking to?" I apparently looked at her like it's obvious and reply, "He's my friend, and he says he knows you, Mama. His name's Charlie." My mother was stunned. The conversation continued until I apparently grew out of them. They say age desensitizes you. Who knows? I often quietly pay my respects to Charlie. I recently went to his grave with my mother. If it weren't for his untimely passing, I'd never have been here. Ask Reddit. When I was in grade school, my friend and I had to come in one Saturday to do some cleaning as punishment for something that we did. They had us go to the church, which was associated with the school, and help the priest lead the room full of boxes and told us to help organize things. I guess it was all stuff people donated, and we were tasked with separating books from clothing, things like that. Anyway, there had always been this rumor that there was a secret bowling alley in the basement of the church, and my friend and I were definitely going to take this opportunity to find out if that was true. After watching us for about 10 minutes, the priest leaves us alone and said he'll come back later to check up on us. We waited a few minutes and then decided to try and find the basement. This church was huge, so it wasn't easy, but it was fun. Felt like being in some heist movie. About 20 minutes or so, we finally found it. We walked into this giant room with tables and chairs stacked everywhere. The only light that we had was this shitty flashlight from my friend's flip phone. We eventually found a light and realized where we were. We found the bowling alley. It was only a couple of lanes and looked in pretty bad shape. Probably hadn't been used for decades, and now they just used the space to store tables and chairs. It was cool to discover that the rumor was true, but at the same time, it was kind of disappointing. I looked it up years later, and I guess the church closed because of the deterioration in 1988. It was reopened in 1992. I guess they didn't feel it was worth fixing. So now it's just a giant storage room. No ghosts in that story, but still cool. Peculiar Facebook Marketplace buyer told me my headboard was possessed. A seller messages me, looking to purchase the headboard for their new room. They come out, look at the headboard. My daughter touches the headboard and then goes and whispers to her mom. Mom says, I don't think this will match our room. I politely say goodbye and they drive away. 15 minutes later, presumably they returned home, I get a series of messages from the person. Yeah, this is the conversation. Person. Just wondering, have you lost somebody recently? Has someone close to you died recently? Me. No, family's all in good health. Person. Well, I'm not sure what you believe in, or don't believe in, but my daughter has a spiritual gift, and she's a medium. That headboard has an angry spirit attached to it, and that's why she doesn't want it. And now she's in excruciating pain. It's like the spirit doesn't want you to sell it. So, think outside a close family member, anybody else that you may have lost recently? Maybe a friend? Or maybe the spirit was already attached to the headboard when you got it? Where'd you get the headboard? Me. I purchased it from the original owner, a family in the suburbs with 2 kids. They got it from some store. Person. Well, they may have lost someone, or they may have been someone in one of those 2 houses. But there is an angry spirit, a male, attached to that headboard, and does not want to leave, or for you to sell it. So if any other medium comes to look at it, they won't buy it either. Since now the spirit is attached to you, doesn't want to leave you, and lets the medium know with anger, heat, and fire. Best of luck to you for as long as the spirit stays inside the headboard. There's no way to get rid of it. My daughter's hand is still on fire with spiking pain. Will be that way for a while. Me. I do hope your daughter's headache and hands, all those aches pass soon. Thank you for the information, although it doesn't seem to align with anything that we know about the headboard. I don't believe in spiritism and mediumship. However, my wife does. She's not a medium, but some of her family are, and have visions of deceased people. Person. Not a headache. Her hand where she touched the headboard is on fire and has spiking pain running through it, as this is what angry spirits do to mediums. Person. None of the mediums you know will probably be able to feel or sense this spirit, as he is quite strong if he can place himself inside wood and cause heat and fire transfer. Tell your wife, she will believe it. Me. Thinking hand pain equals allergy. Me. Okay. For what it's worth, I did wipe down the headboard with a diluted lavender cleaner, similar to Lysol. Person. Means nothing. Me. Although you're certain of your daughter's assessment, I figured I'd mention it. Person. No, I'm positive of her abilities, God-given. At this point, my attention was called away for 3 hours. When I got back, the kind lady had blocked me. Anyway, that's the story. Wife found her account, and all my means that she seemed like a pretty normal person. Anyway, I'm not posting this to shame the person, her daughter, or the alleged abilities. If I did, I'd have posted this to some other sub. Story number 14. I was being watched by the Hat Man for most of my childhood. When I was around the age of 10, I felt like I was being watched all the time, every day. That feeling never went away. Sometimes this thing, quote-unquote, or spirit, quote-unquote, did show itself. It was a tall man wearing all black with a black hat, and sometimes had glowing red eyes, if I remember right. I was very scared and didn't know if this man or spirit would do anything to me, but he made me feel unsafe, and it felt like he was going to harm me in some way. I don't know how, but something like murder or give me some very life-threatening injuries, maybe kidnap me, I'm not sure. But as a 10-year-old, that scared the living shit out of me. I remember some nights I couldn't sleep in my own room. I couldn't have the window closed, even if it was very hot outside my room, because there was a chance that he might come in through the window. If he wasn't under the bed, in the closet, or behind my curtains. Some days I couldn't be alone anywhere, like I couldn't be in the living room and my mom was in the kitchen. I felt like this man could come and get me. This kept going until I was around 14, I think. Even the not sleeping in my room, I was sleeping on the couch in the living room with my mom. But over the years, I felt the presence of this man or spirit, and it only got worse. He could be anywhere from behind a door to the smallest cracks, like between the sofa and the floor. I'm not sure how, but he went away, and I just kind of woke up one day and he was gone. But lately, I felt his presence slowly coming back. Not how it was when I was a kid, but I still know he's watching me. Not that long ago, I got to know about the Hat Man and did some research and found out that I'm not the only one who's seen or felt like I've been watched by this unknown man. And it's quite scary to think about that. This is even happening to many people, so it's probably not just some weird illusion or some weird brain thing. Can someone tell me what this is? I'm a 22-year-old female. I currently live with my boyfriend and 2 cats. At around 18, when I lived with my parents, I started having some paranormal things happen to me. It started with hearing my cat's bells. Now that I'm thinking about it, this cat was a gift from my best friend. He was an elderly cat, and its owners passed away. Unfortunately, I had to give him back to my best friend because I was moving. But the fact that his owner passed away has me thinking now. I would be lying on the bed with my cat and I would hear his bells from his toys underneath my bed or on the wood floor. It always creeped me out a bit, but I just tried to tell myself it was my grandparents letting me know that they're here. I started to see blobs of color. Very hard to describe, but I know I wasn't crazy because my best friend would assure me that she could also see them. Then the most significant thing happened. We were home alone, just got back from school. My parents have a dog who's very territorial and will always let you know if something is knocking on the door or coming inside. We heard someone rush through the front door and start playing the TV, washing dishes and using the microwave. But the dog hadn't made a peep. I yelled, "Anybody there?" No response. We looked outside. Still, no cars parked. I never went downstairs because I was terrified. But yeah, that happened. Moved to my sister's house. Still saw the blob. Still heard the bells. Mind you, I didn't have that cat anymore, from when I started to hear the bells in the first place. I did have a new cat and I still heard the bells. Tried not to scare myself whenever I saw or heard these things, though. Then I moved again, into my boyfriend's house. There was definitely some spirits before we moved in. I would see figures out of the corners of my eye all the time. I was terrified there. And I still heard the bells. Now I live in a different apartment, and I still hear the bells yet again. I haven't seen the blob since I lived with my sister, though. But it's currently almost 4 a.m., and I heard the bells going crazy. It's not my cats. They're on my bed, and they don't have collars with bells or anything. There's one single toy in my apartment with the bell, and it suctions to a wall that's not in my bedroom where I always hear the bell. For some reason, it freaked me out a little extra tonight. I just want to know if this has ever happened to anyone else. Is it a ghost? Or am I just paranoid? I'm home alone most days as my boyfriend is always at work, and I'm used to it. I'm never paranoid about being home alone. However, today I was in the bathroom when I heard my cabinets opening and closing. I also heard someone's heavy footsteps, as well as the vibration walking across my floor. I have envelopes lying on the ground near the door and heard them crunch underneath someone's feet. I'm on the top floor. so I never hear or feel anyone else's footsteps except for my boyfriend's when he's home. Sounds like someone was wearing boots walking around my kitchen and living room, and it's a small apartment, so I hear everything. I panicked and I decided to call 911 because the footsteps did not stop. Once they arrived, no one was here. The door was locked just as I had left it, and there was zero signs of forced entry. My cabinets were in fact crept slightly open, and I never do that. All of my things are still in the same spot that I left them. No other people in the apartment building are home. 2 other occupants, and they're both at work. So the footsteps couldn't have possibly come from anyone else. Absolutely zero sign of someone else being in here with me besides the cabinets being slightly open. I'm not a person who would be paranoid from a few strange noises while home alone, but this sounded way too much like someone was with me in here. Was it a hungry ghost? Was I paranoid for some reason? Did someone break in and for no reason and just lock the door and leave? I'm so confused. Abnormal dreams. Looking for others that might have them. Just to make a point, twice I've dreams of children. Weird dreams. Like I held a small boy and it was not my kid. I looked around and asked, "Who's this kid?" And an old friend turned to me and said, "It's my boy." And I woke up. The day after I went to see him, thought I would tell him about the dream, and when I did, he laughed and said that his girlfriend, I didn't know he had one by the way, was pregnant, and they were gonna announce it. Turned out, it was a boy. When my girlfriend got pregnant, I had a similar dream. I held 2 beautiful girls, and I cried because I was so happy. They were my girls, and when I woke up, I laughed and told my girlfriend that we would have twin girls, and turns out, we actually did. Here's a freaky one. I had just moved to Australia to study, and I had a vivid dream of a monster chasing me in a desert, and I went into a room. It's in the middle of the desert, trying to escape, but it had no windows except for the door I came in through. And then the monster came inside, and I was terrified. At that point, a man dressed in white said my name and told me I was dreaming, and I knew right away that it was a dream, and all the fear disappeared. I thanked him, and he said that he was here to warn me. He told me that I would die if I stayed in Australia. I asked him maybe 20 questions of why and when, and so many things, and he just replied on each and every thing. This was my first day there, and I came late at night. I asked him in the end if I would believe this when I woke up. He told me, some do, some don't. I begged him to show me a sign in the real world. He said it was very difficult, but he would try, and would see the sign over an odd word. At that point, I had no idea what that word meant, and I thanked him, and we shook hands, and I woke up in that very moment. Later that day, I saw that word on the apartment building next door. Sure, my subconscious could have picked it up and created this vivid dream, but he told me that they warn everybody all the time. Here's a second one that's odd, and those odd ones I have difficulty forgetting. I had a dream, and it was a normal dream, but at one point I saw a door and I was clearing my head, like I knew that it was a dream, but that door was not supposed to be there. It was in my town and the door was misplaced, so the dream kinda just stopped and I went inside the door where I met this weird guy that got startled and told me I wasn't allowed to be in here. But I remained, and he had this computer, quote-unquote. It was made of glass and lights. He told me that this was all of our lives, and he showed me my lives. There was hundreds of them. The glass thingies could connect them, and I could see moments from those lives. It had green and red, and those lights represented good and bad times. A red life meant I had a bad life, a tough one, and if you opened it, there could be both red and green moments, but the overall was red. I was shown that my younger brother and I shared a lot of lives together. But my other siblings shared only this one. I asked to see the last life that he showed me again. He told me that here time ends. He opened it, and I saw a fish-like person swimming in a dark ocean with a bunch of others, kind of like mermaids, but not like anything I'd ever seen before. I thanked him, went out the door. Sure, it could be a dream. It was a dream, but it stuck hard with me for some reason. Then we have the last one. My very first dream I had as a toddler, over and over and over. And whatever I did, I could never change a single thing in this dream. It played like a movie until it ended, the same as it did every night. I had this dream for years. Lived in a house with a mom and dad. She was sick, always at home, and he, I think, was a carpenter. I had my room up the steps in the living room, and my mom would always walk into the kitchen and grab a knife, which my dad took out of her hand and cried and begged her to stop, but she was ill somehow. And this day in my dream, my dad was fixing the roof, and she chased me with the knife. I climbed the stair to reach him, and before I could, she stabbed me in the back, and I died right there in his arms. And I floated above him, holding me in this dream. I don't know, I remember it so well, every detail of it printed in my mind. Bonded with an animal. Anyone know what it's called, or have had a similar experience? As a kid, I was physically abused daily, beaten by many, an easy target. My stepdad was as evil as so many around him. A small town that just didn't like the scrawny kid that was me, that had a dad in a foreign country. Why I say this is because it's part of the story. I had no one in my life, my mother always away working, my siblings older or avoiding me, as no one wants to be around the kid that gets beaten because they will too. My mom once took me to see my aunt. She had kittens and went up to see them, and all of them were feeding except one, an odd-looking red thing that was away from his mother, making small sounds, all lost and so tiny. My aunt said that he probably wouldn't make it, as the small ones rarely do, as they struggle to find the tit and so forth and so on. So I helped him. Every day I begged my mom to visit, and we did what we could, and I always found him lost somewhere, blind, abandoned, and brought him to his mom, played with him, sat with him, talked to him, until one day, when I was there and my aunt said that I could take him home, my mom nodded, happy to stay my life. He was such a scared thing, always frightened, and he used to sit inside my t-shirt close to my body. Only place that he would be quiet and not cry out. He slept with me, ate with me, and I tried to leave him somewhere that he could just cry and cry and cry. So it pretty much ended up that I had him on my shoulder like a parrot. He loved it. From the start of the day till the end, until we got into my room. And then he went bananas, running wild. And I trained him for battle with my teddy bears and stuffed animals, and I loved him with all my heart. He followed me wherever I went. When I walked to school, which took 30 minutes, he would sneak after me, hiding in the woods, because he knew if I saw him, I would take him home and lock him inside. Because I feared that he would get hurt, either by once beating me, or the train, or the cars. So I used to stand still, looking into the woods, and I'd say, "I see you. I know you're there, come out." And he would come forward, feeling busted, purring, and I had to grab him, run home, lock inside, and run back. I have thousands of stories like this. Like Christmas. I was sitting on the edge of the sofa, and he came inside the room, jumped up onto the sofa, and everybody tried to grab him and pet him. And he just ran past them all and threw himself down on my lap, purring. It was me and him against the world. During winter, I used to walk deep into the snowy woods, and he would sit on my shoulder or jump in my footprints. There we would lay down and watch the stars until it was frozen solid. Then he'd just lay on my chest purring. Truly loved him. And I always knew that he was around me, just Had to peek left or right or something, and there he was, sneaking around following me. Until one dreadful day, I was inside my neighbor's house playing tabletop games, and in a blink of a moment, I was struck with immense pain in my chest, and I knew something had happened to him. I told my neighbor that I had to go find my cat, that something had happened, and they went outside and he wasn't out there, waiting for me like he always did. I searched all day and didn't find him. My mom went to part with my awful stepdad, and I kept looking. When the clock was 4 at night, my mom came back, and I met her one night in the streets, and she was surprised to see me up. I told her I'm looking for my cat. With a drunk voice, she told me that he was dead, had been hit by a car, and they hid him from me because they knew how close we were. The next day, I buried him with the most precious things I owned. I felt like something was ripped from my chest. How can that be the moment it happened? How could I have felt that? What does that mean? I doubt I could ever get a bond like that again. I've had plenty of pets after. Nothing remotely as powerful as this.